Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman just returned from Ukraine with a group of other senators, and he's with us now. Senator, thank you for your time. Good morning. Welcome back to U.S. soil here.
Good morning.
What was your sense? Do you believe Putin's ready to go in, and will he?
Well, it's very troubling. He has amassed over 100,000 troops on the border of Ukraine, and I was very pleased to see those strong words from Secretary Blinken. They echo what we were saying over the last couple of days in Ukraine, which is that the United States unequivocally stands with a Ukraine that has turned to the West, turned toward democracy, freedom. They don't want to go back to an authoritarian past. I think this is why President Putin feels such a threat. It's not that Ukraine threatens Russia in any way, except for the fact that they're a democracy that's thriving. And so we need to stand with them, as do our European allies, our NATO allies, and other freedom-loving countries all around the world. And we're seeing a strong stand against what might happen. The question is, can we convince the Russians that this would be a terrible mistake, which I believe it would be, both in terms of the bloody costs that they will entail in Ukraine, because the Ukrainian people are ready to defend themselves, but second, with regard to devastating sanctions that the United States and other countries are ready to impose.
Listen to Jake Sullivan from CBS Sunday. This is how he was talking about Russia and the sanctions.
If it turns out that Russia is pummeling Ukraine with cyber attacks, and if that continues over the period ahead, we will work with our allies on the appropriate response. If Russia wants to go down the path of invasion and escalation, we're ready for that too, with a robust response that will cut at their strategic positions.
So you were just there. What's the state of mind there, especially for somebody like President Zelensky, who is hoping that the West can help him, but isn't sure that it will be successful?
Well, the ministers we met with all of them, the defense minister and the interior minister and the foreign affairs minister, energy minister, as well as President Zelensky, they were all of one mind, which is that they are unified, and the country is unified against the possibility of Russian invasion of any type. And the mention of cyber attacks is significant because they just had a huge cyber attack on their institutions last week. So this is a Russian-backed effort that's sort of a hybrid war, as they say. It's not just the military part of it. It's other ways they're trying to destabilize the government. So the government's unified, the country's unified. I will say, Dana, to your question, they want to know that we're with them and that other countries are as well. I believe that's true. I'd like to see more, frankly, from Germany in terms of public statements of support that no matter what happens, that they will not move forward with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, as an example, which would be a weapon in the hands of Vladimir Putin and the Russians, should it be completed and should it be certified.
Yeah, we're watching that. We're talking tough. We've taken some action that would indicate that we're being tougher than 2014. Two specific questions here, Senator. Do you believe Putin sees a weak America on this issue?
I certainly hope not. And the statement from Secretary Blinken that you just gave us is an indication that, you know, America is saying the right things. And I believe we will stand by it.
So then are we willing to give concessions to Putin to keep him out of Ukraine?
Well, the concessions he's asking for are outrageous, not anything that we or the NATO countries would ever give. NATO has an open door policy. We're not making the decision as to whether Ukraine is eligible for NATO. They're making that decision. They'd have to go through steps, but if they want to pursue that, it's within their sovereign, independent ability to do that. We can't stop countries from being able to join NATO, and that's what one of the conditions are that Vladimir Putin has talked about publicly. So my hope is that we can continue the dialogue. There are probably areas of agreement we can find in terms of transparency and other issues, but not the fundamental right of NATO to have an open door policy.
Senator, how do you explain to Americans or the people of Ohio why they should care? Why this matters and why the United States should be strong here?
Well, first, because it's not just about Ukraine. This is about the stability of Europe. Think about it, Dana. Not since World War II have we seen these kind of territorial incursions. They've already taken part of Ukraine, and that would be Crimea. They've also come into the eastern part of Ukraine, that's the Donbas region, totally against every international law on the books. And so it wouldn't stop there, and it does affect the people of Ukraine, who are our allies and our friends, but it also is about the stability of Europe, and therefore affects the United States and all freedom-loving countries in a very direct way.
Senator, welcome home. Thank you for your time. Do
you
feel better, worse, or about the same since before you went to Ukraine?
Well, I'm more concerned than ever, given the intelligence we were able to get over there, which I won't go into in detail. But it's true, as you have reported, that they not only have 100,000 troops or so, that they're bringing additional heavy equipment and troops into the area. So that Russia is doing things that are definitely provocative, aggressive, unwarranted. I was encouraged, however, by the unity that I saw in the country and the unity that I heard in terms of our allies. And we were there. The Minister of Foreign Affairs from Canada and Germany were both in town as well. So this is a serious situation. It needs to be treated as such. And we all of us, all freedom-loving countries, not just NATO allies, but all of us need to stand firm.
Senator, thank you.
Thank you.
Rob Portman, the
Thanks,
Republican
guys.
from Ohio. Yeah, thank you. We will speak again soon.
Thank you.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.